Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Salam Islamic Center, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as an educator with Dr. Suleyman Sertkaya. We're going over chapter 6 this week. Suleyman Sertkaya is a lecturer from Sturt University, and he graduated from the School of Divinity at the University of Marmara in Istanbul. He pursued his MA in the Tafsir, Exegesis discipline of Islamic sciences, with a particular focus on the exegesis of the Qur'an. Suleyman completed his PhD thesis at Australian Catholic University on the Sīrah Genre. He is currently a lecturer at Center for Islamic Studies and Civilisation, Sturt University. His major interests are Sīrah, Biography of the Prophet Muhammad, Sīrah Philosophy, Exegesis of the Qur'an, Prophetic Tradition, Interpretation of Islamic Sacred Texts, Islamic Theology, Radicalisation and Islam, Islam and Morality and Interfaith Dialogue, Oral History, History of Islam and Muslims in Australia. Dr. Sertkaya, thanks for joining us today. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Attila, for inviting me, first and foremost. It's a great pleasure to be part of Salam Institute. Thank you for inviting me to your community. And it is also a great pleasure and blessing to be part of any project that deals with the blessed life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it's an honor to be here. Inshallah, I'll go through the chapter, pretty much follow the order in the chapter, but I'll make some perhaps slight changes sometimes, just to have a logical sequence in the chain of thought. But that will be my plan for this presentation. So we are talking about Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as an educator, and the book, the chapter, starts with a verse from the Qur'an in chapter 62, verse number 2, which is chapter Juma, verse number 2. It is an extremely important verse in the Qur'an. It's almost identically mentioned in 4 different areas, 4 different places in the Qur'an. Each has a different starting point, but the context is different, but pretty much the wording is really same. Why it is important and why this is quoted like a heading for this chapter of a kind of a subtitle, because it talks about the mission of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the verse says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Huwa alladhi ba'atha fil ummiyina rasulan minhum yatlu alayhim ayatihi wa yuzakkihim wa yu'allimuhumul kitaba wal hikmah wa in kanu min qablu lafi dhalalin mubin." So he it is who sent among the unlettered ones a messenger of their own, reciting to them his revelations, purifying them, and instructing them in the book and the wisdom, whereas before that they were indeed lost in obvious error. So this verse is quoted, and the chapter starts with the analysis of this verse, kind of section by section, because it is important. The verse gives us a clear indication and understanding of the life before Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was sent to Arabian Peninsula. So who they were and why he was sent. It really clearly articulates the mission and the main message of the Prophet ﷺ. And it is quite strictly linked to the topic, which is the education or educational methods of the Prophet ﷺ. So huwa alladhi ba'atha fil ummiyin. Allah is referred to as who in this chapter, in this verse, because they don't really know precisely who Allah is. They have an idea, but that is kind of forgotten. That is mixed up with so many different understanding, and more problematically, it was actually part of an idol worshipping. It was part of polytheism. So they understand, but it is not clear enough. That's why it is referred to as huwa in Arabic, as the third person, as if they don't really know. So هو الذي بعث في الأميين. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent among Ummi people. So Ummi is explained further as these people are isolated from words, powers and civilizations, so they are not really indulged into or have any kind of close relationship with the other civilizations of the time, like the Byzantine and Persian empires and other ideologies or other civilizations. So these people are Ummi, but they are not really, all of them are not really Ummi in a sense that they didn't have schooling or reading and writing skills. They did have schooling. They knew how to read and write, but that was very minimal. But the overall stage of that people pre-Islamic Arabia was unlettered. So, but the translation is good. I suppose it is very accurate when it comes to translate this word and attribute it to the Prophet ﷺ. The author himself and the translator himself is very particular and very accurate in that sense, because Prophet ﷺ, although he was not reading, he didn't have a schooling, he didn't know how to read and write, but he was not illiterate, he was unlettered. So that is very precise way of approaching the Prophet ﷺ, because the author says, being chosen by God, he could not possibly belong to the age of ignorance. So we cannot think of the Prophet ﷺ as, he was part of the age of ignorance. He was a person from the Jahiliyyah period. Not at all. So the unlettered translation gives that indication, which is, I think, good. But he was among them in that sense that they can relate to him. So he was one of them, that he was sharing the same culture, coming from the same background. He was Ummi in that sense. But because Allah is going to take him and he is going to be nurtured and educated purely by God, and he will become the educator of the educators. So, his Ummiyah, his being unlettered, is actually a plus. And it is a great ground for him to be, flourish and to be a best educator for people that will come after. But here we can understand that, okay, he was unlettered, he came to that people because we are now understanding the context of those people. These people, they are living in the age of ignorance. Ignorance here refers to the stage of these people which is not enlightened with the luminous lights of the messengers or the revelation, really. So, but these people are part of, he came to them, he is part of among them. But what is his message really? What is his mission? The verse continues and says, يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ. He is from them, but he came to recite to them his revelation or his signs. Ayat in the verse refers to the book of God that is revealed. So each verse, each ayah in the Qur'an is an ayah. It is a verse, but everything in the universe really is a sign for the oneness of God. So he came to teach them how to read these verses that are manifested and revealed in the book of God, which is the revealed book, and in the universe, which is another kind of form of revelation. Everything really signifies to him. So he came to teach them how to read that. And also, not only that, وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. He came to purify them. So purify them of false beliefs, false doctrines and purify themselves, them spiritually, if you like, and clear them of the sins and all kind of wrong understanding, misconceptions that are not befitting a proper human being. So he came to really elevate them and purify them in that sense as well. These are really important because the following sections will go back to one of these, verses or words that are mentioned in this particular verse. But it also continues then, وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ. He came to teach them the book, instruct them the book of God. So he is a muallim in a sense. He came as a teacher, as an educator, to teach them how to read the book. Again, we can understand this as a book of God that is revealed as a book of universe. And then he says, وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْحِكْمَةَ. So to instruct them the wisdom as well. So that really is very overarching, encompassing the verse that, his message, his mission is not only in a narrowly spiritual sense, it really has two wings in terms of religion and in terms of science, if you like. So he came to combine all of them, give them an instruction how to understand who we are, how to understand the book of God, how to understand the universe, and how to be a rightly guided person in all senses. So that is his main mission. وَإِن كَانُوا مِن قَبْلُ لَفِي ضَلَالٍ مُبِينٍ, the verse says. Before the prophet, they were indeed lost in obvious error, it says. So it is quite clear in this verse that, he has a very broad message, and his method of education encompasses the purification of the heart and mind. It encompasses the understanding of the universe. It encompasses how to be a wise person, if you like. So these are really broad and very large areas that he really combined in him and in his message. So that is basically goes back to the purpose of creation. We can clearly say that he came to teach us what is the purpose of creation, why we exist, and he came to guide us to the right path, to attain the highest rank in spirituality, to be a rightly guided people. So if we think about the message and his mission and his education system, it is not only, as we said, the verse is quite clearly referring to that, but it is not only about the purification of the heart. It has a very broad areas. His education system came to satisfy the needs of humanity in almost all fields. So this is what his primary mission and message is about. So it is relevant to morality, relevant to spirituality, it is relevant to economics, it is relevant to finance, administration, schooling, justice, international relations, all walks of life. Anything that comes to mind can, be considered as part of his mission, and he has given guidance through the Qur'an and through his path, his sunnah, to the people. So his religion, ultimately, the author quotes a verse from the Qur'an and a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which says, if you begin with the hadith, how his religion perfected is perfect religion. It is a complete religion. So he quotes the hadith, which is narrated in Sahih Muslim. Each prophet before me, he says, constructed some parts of this marvelous building. So imagine a palace like a building. It is constructed, beautifully. It is a marvelous building, but there is a little hole or something. It is not really complete. People come, they go around the building, they are fascinated with the building, with the structure, with the design, everything is perfect, except for one thing. So there's something missing there. So everyone says, I wonder when this building will be completed. And Prophet says, I have completed it. For after me, there will be no more defects in this structure. So all religions and all prophets came before him. They were actually building the same structure. They were putting some sort of, bricks to this marvelous building, but it wasn't complete up until the time when the Prophet ﷺ came and he delivered his message. Then this beautiful, marvelous building became so perfect that there is no defect in it at all. So he says, I am that bridge. I am that, last stone that is placed to complete and beautify this marvelous building. The Quran affirms this, and this is one of the latest verses revealed to the Prophet ﷺ on the day of Arafat. We are approaching to these days. So we clearly know, towards the end of his life, right after the pilgrimage, his farewell sermon, he received this revelation, which says, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati." So today, Allah says in this verse in chapter 5, Surah Ma'idah, verse number 3, this day I have perfected for you your religion. So in its all rules, all commandments, in terms of universality, this religion is perfected by the Prophet ﷺ, with the message of the Prophet, with the Quran. So the verse says, it is complete, it is perfected, and my favor upon you is completed. And I have been pleased to assign for you Islam as a religion. This is the fundamental, aspect of his education strategy and methods, that it has a complete way of life. It addresses all aspects of our life, all needs of the humanity, all aspects of a human being. So nothing is missed out. If you think of a human body as a spirit, as a, let's say, mind, soul, spirit, heart, so these are all addressed. If you think of humanity as a different, walks of life, you can see that it is addressed. If you think of the expertise or different kind of occupation, so in terms of finance to education, in terms of philosophy to theology, you can find perfectness and you can find guidance in the message of the Prophet ﷺ. So then the book moves on, and I had divided this into 6 main subheadings, if you like, 6 main points before we move on to the strategies or his essentials as an educator. So the first one, the first argument, the author Fethullah Gülen argues that how we can assess an educator's perfectness, right? We claim, I think the book, before we move on to that, the book is very precise in a way that everything the author puts forward is to prove that he is the best example. I think previously probably we have discussed him as a family man, in different aspects. So he argues that, and he is actually proving that he is a truly prophet, and all these things are in one way or another are feeding to, to prove his prophethood and to show that he has these essential characteristics of prophets. So let's say, having this perfectness and being able to address all needs of humanity, you have to have a perfect intellect, which the author calls it as fatana, prophetic intellect. So his education is one aspect, one dimension of his fatana. So because he has that prophetic intellect, which is beyond a normal, ordinary person's intellect, so what he brought and how he addressed people is kind of solving all kinds of problems and providing a best model for educators. So as I said, I divided this into 6 main points. The first one, he says, the author argues that an educator's perfection depends on the greatness of his or her ideal. First and foremost, the ideal must be great. It shouldn't be an ordinary ideal. So it has to have a very appealing and very great ideal. But this is not enough, he says. And he says the quantitative and qualitative dimensions of his or her listeners. So ideal must be great, as well as he has to have a very good qualities that we'll discuss later on, and so many people that are following his footsteps, right? That shows that everybody is fascinated with that and they are following his footsteps. I think this is very important because while he was alive, while the Prophet ﷺ was alive, his message was, able to reach all different corners of Arabian Peninsula, and he was kind of have a touch with all corners of world because he started to send messengers and ambassadors to different regions and rulers of the world. So here we can clearly see that it was already universal. While he was alive, it was already heard in all different corners of the world. And we talk about globalization at this day and age because of this technology. Now I'm in Australia, you are listening me from America, but at that time, you can see that in a very primitive sense, even it was already global. The message was heard, and it was universally, appealing to so many people. This is a great achievement because we respect all prophets. Obviously, it is part of our creed, but none of the prophets before the Prophet ﷺ had that success. So, think about Musa alayhi salam, one of the greatest prophet, Ulul Azm prophet in our belief, in our system, in our theology. But when he passed away, Bani Israel was wandering in the desert still. They didn't even reach to the promised land. Think about Isa alayhi salam, there were a handful of people, Jesus followers. They were actually looking for ways to seclude themselves from the oppression. So when you think about the Prophet ﷺ, while he was alive, so he says first thing, in terms of quality, in terms of ideals, and in terms of quantity, it has reached to so many people still when he was alive. Secondly, he says an educator's greatness also depends on the continuation of his or her principles. So you might have a very good system, you might have a very good ideals, but nobody follows. Nobody follows. So this is not a great enough, and this is not the best education model because nobody is, following it. He says, no one can deny that the people all over the world accept his message and adopts his principles. So if you think about the Prophet ﷺ, so it continues and it is still relevant in 21st century after 15 centuries, and it is still appealing, it is still very fascinating, and it is still addressing the needs so that Islam is growing quite fast. So then he moves on to some details. I'll further explain these details in a moment. He says everything. So these two principles are like primary default principles. So ideal must be great. There must be quantity and quality, and it should continue. So that is important to consider a model, an education model as a successful model. So that is already relevant, and already this can be found in the message of the Prophet ﷺ. But he also points out that think about the Arabian Peninsula. Remember the verse as well, we quoted. So everything evil could be found in Arabia before the Prophet, right? We will talk about this a bit more in detail. But it was a very corrupt society. It was a very much backward and barbaric society. But when Prophet ﷺ came, he eradicated these evils. This is a success in itself, but it is not enough to be a really good educator. So you say, you eradicate a bad, evil conducts, but replacing them with such deep rooted values, universal values and virtues, that his people became the leaders and teachers of the civilized world. So this is also very significant. And as a third principle, it is extremely important. So a good educator, he is the one who is able to eradicate bad, morals, evil conducts, but also replace them with the good one, replace them with the virtuous one. And this can be found in the Prophet ﷺ's message as well. We will give some examples later. So, and then he says, this is, in my understanding, is the fourth important principle. Prophet Muhammad had a holistic view of each individual. So he addressed human beings, individuals, holistically. He didn't say, okay, I should address his logic. Oh, my concern is religious, so I should address his heart. That is not enough. So he addressed all faculties of human body. So because human body is consist of soul, spirit, and physical body, which we have senses, which we have mind, intellect, heart. So he did not neglect any of them. So he took all of their mental and spiritual capacities and developed them, turning his own wretched people into paragons of virtue. His wisdom in assessing such potential is another proof of his prophethood, he says. So this is the fourth one. This fifth one is his example, his representation. He points out that the messenger, Prophet ﷺ, represented and expressed what he wanted to teach through his actions. And then he translated his actions into words. So words does not come first in his educational methods, in his philosophy. What comes first is actions. So what he lived by is actually encouraged. His entire life is a great proof to this statement, I suppose, because before even he was appointed as a prophet, he was known as the trustworthy person, right? Very truthful and very trustworthy person. So even before he started preaching, he was known with these good qualities. And this is, I think, goes back to the earlier chapters where he discusses the qualities of prophets, that they have trustworthiness, they have truthfulness, and this they have infallibility, and this encompasses their entire life, not only after prophethood. So that is very important. And he talks about this a lot, that he represented what he preached, he practiced what he preached. And in relation to this, I actually wanted to separate that as a sixth point. We can assess, he says, a person's impact through his or her behavior while at home. Look, I am very honest here with you all. I am speaking about these beautiful, teachings. People can be amazed, say, look, Suleyman, how beautifully, he talks, how great is he. But it doesn't really matter what they think. But if at home, I'm something totally different than what I am practicing or what I'm speaking of in the community, in the society, that is not right, But when you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, in his household, you can clearly see that, how he was impacting people. If you truly wanted to impact people, transform people, educate people, you have to have an impact in your little circle first. If you can't impact them, if you talk about tahajjud prayer, let's say, if you talk about fasting, so many days, and you don't really practice, who is going to follow you? And your family environment is a great proof and first point of reference, really, to look at it. So he says, look at the household of the Prophet ﷺ. There is a persistent, awe of God. Everybody, if you have a glimpse of a moment in the household of the Prophet ﷺ, you will feel the terror of hell and the blessings of paradise. So people around him, they were affected by him because he was practicing. If he says pray that much, he was doing so much after that. He was actually saying that. So it is quite clear here that the Prophet ﷺ was practicing what he preached. And finally, he gives so many examples from the pre-Islamic era, how he transformed people into paragons of virtues. He gives an example from the pre-Islamic life of, let's say, Abdullah ibn Masud, or some other great individuals, and he says, look at them. Like, let's consider one of the examples he provided. Abdullah ibn Masud was a shepherd, looking after somebody's flocks, and then he embraced Islam at very early stages, and then he transformed into the best educator, so much so that Hanafi school of thought is based on his teachings, is based on his students. So he gives another example from Uqba ibn Nafi, another emancipated slave, how he conquered the Spain and his behavior during this conquest. So it is totally different than any successful commander. They are haughty, they are arrogant, but he is humiliated. He says, don't forget, you were a slave yesterday. Now you have this power. Tomorrow you will be standing before God. So this, sense of, humility, this sense of God consciousness is not something easy to achieve. But this is what Prophet's teaching transformed the community. He changed all this barbaric society and turned them into teachers of civilized nations. He talks about, I think this is a very unique aspect. He talks about the school of Prophet Muhammad. He says, look at the school of Prophet Muhammad. He is like a madrasa. He is like a school. Look at the graduates. Remember the quality and quantity? Look at the graduates of this school, starting from companions, going through the subsequent generations, great minds in philosophy, in science, in theology, in education, in military dimensions, in administration. He gives so many examples, and he also visits some of the Western, academics or even Orientalists. They couldn't stop themselves but to confess that he was a great, successful educator, leader, and transformative, individual. So, for instance, a French historian, Lamartine, confirms his status by saying philosopher, orator, apostle, legislator, warrior, conqueror of ideas, restorer of rational dogmas, of a cult without images, the founder of 20 terrestrial states. So based on his teachings, 20 worldly states established after him, and he says, but it is at the end of the day, one spiritual state, that is Muhammad, he says. So he confirms that he is, in all these aspects, a very successful person. As regards all standards by which human greatness may be measured, we may well ask, is there any man greater than he? So he confesses that there is no other man in the course of history greater than him. So 3 more points. I'll just conclude with these points. He says, there is a section in the book which is called Qualities qualities, essentials of a good education. So after all these points, he kind of summarizes, what are the main essentials of good education. So he says a genuine educator must possess the following virtues in order to be successful in his education. First one, a real educator gives necessary importance to all aspects of a person's mind, spirit, and self. So you cannot separate all this. You cannot say religion is different, science is different. So this is not how Islam approaches human beings. This is not the philosophy that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, introduced or used in his life, in his sunnah. So it should address a person's intellect, his mind, his spirit, and self, and strives to raise each property to its desired level. So how we can really flourish the capacity of intellect, how we can flourish the capacity of spirit, purify it. Remember purification, remember wisdom in the verse that is quoted, all goes back to that verse in one way or another. So these are the real, qualities of an educator. Secondly, he says, a real educator brings a universal message. It should be universal, comprehensive, and address, and it has to have a good quality of students. So that universality, good students, and continuation is a proof to the greatness of the education system. So look at, he says, the companions took the education system of the Prophet all over the world and found followers among people of different races, religious background, and intellectual levels. So if you think about the people who followed Islam, followed the Prophet's message after him, even today, they are coming from all ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, but they are finding it relevant. It is addressing their needs and providing a solution for their needs. And finally, he says a real educator transforms his followers positively. So this transformational approach, really, his education is transformational. He transformed that society within a very short period of time, not in centuries, only in 23 years. That barbaric society turned into a civilized nation, and they became great educators for civilized people. Abdullah ibn Masud that we just talked about is a great evidence to that, because he was a shepherd. Then Hanafi school of thought is practiced in mostly civilized regions, and still it is one of the most prominent and mostly followed school of thought. He actually, very interestingly, he quotes the name of Hayy in relation to this understanding. Allah is Hayy. He gives life to death. So he says these people, pre-Islamic Arabia, they were like coal, they were like stones. When the hands of Prophet ﷺ touched them, they turned into diamonds, pearls, gold, right? Like the name Hayy, the attribute and reflection of the name Hayy is reflected in him in a way that he transformed the entire society to something totally new. So that is the greatness of his education. And he then finally, in the further remarks section, he talks about the thing. People may think that religion makes people lazy. They follow religions blindly. There is no logic in place. It is just to satisfy and console people. So he says, in Prophet's life and in his education philosophy, this has no place at all. He, in contrast to this, he says he encouraged people to work hard. He encouraged people to flourish their skills. And he quotes some important verses and ahadith of the Prophet in that sense. One of the verses is very interesting. The verse says, وَقُلْ اِعْمَلُوا فَسَيَرَ اللَّهُ عَمَلَكُمْ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ. So he says, act. The verse is saying act, do, work hardly, as if you are, presenting your act to God, because Allah will see it, to the messenger and to the people. So this gives a great, sentiment that when a believer, when a follower of the Prophet Muhammad works, when he does something, he does as if he is presenting. Like if I'm going to present something to people, I make a preparation, I make it is formed very well, it has some good look, it has ihsan and itqan, if you like, it has excellence in it. But the verse says, not only you're presenting your work to some other people, as if you're presenting to God, to the messenger and to the believers. It is very high level to be mindful of. And then he quotes some other verses. Allah loves believing, skillful servants. These are some hadiths that really encourages people to work, not to really be lazy, especially in terms of healthy economy and social life. So it talks about the dynamics that Prophet ﷺ introduced. Otherwise, if you become lazy, the hadith that quotes, you become like a subject to other people, other nations. And the author rightly says, unfortunately, we are, in last 3-4 centuries as an Islamic world, we don't really understand these teachings. So we are subject to some other nations and some other people. In conclusion, he says, being a good Muslim is possible only through being a good student in the school of Prophet Muhammad. They became a good students. In the previous pre-Islamic life, they were, considering daughters as a shame. He transformed them, and they have a right. Women have a right. In pre-Islamic society, they were people who didn't respect their parents. They changed totally. They were even having some sort of questions: if I can't smile on the face of my mother, whether I'll be accountable or not. Murder and fornication was common. We don't really recall more than a couple of incidents in the entire life of the Prophet that murder took place or theft took place. So people talk about Islam, if Islam comes, it will chop people's head, chop people's hands. So this is not the case. We only see less than perhaps 5 incidents that theft or fornication took place, and these people even, they came up to the Prophet and asked for purification. And he concludes with the message that he formed from a barbaric society, a society that utopian philosophers cannot even imagine of. And he provides some examples to that. But I think I'll conclude with this statement again. He talks about a madrasa, a school of Prophet Muhammad, and who are the graduates of this school. If you look back to the companions and the early generations, they are great minds of the rulers, of the commanders, of the philosophers, of the scientists of their time. So this is the method of this author, Fethullah Gülen, in his book. He never ever talks about the history purely, something that happened 14 centuries ago. He brings all the discussion back to us as readers. I think that's an important methodology he follows in his book. He brings everything back to his listeners, his audience, and his readers. And he says, being a good Muslim is possible only through being a good student in the school of Prophet Muhammad. He already quoted so many good students of the Prophet that in East and West, everybody appreciated their success, appreciated their efforts, and he is indicating that if we in modern day and age, claiming to be the followers of the Prophet Muhammad, we don't have any option but to be a good student of this madrasa. I pray and wish that we all become a successful students of this beautiful, messenger, this beautiful message, and may Allah, allow us, grant us opportunity to be a good students of this madrasa as well. I'll stop here, and I think I pretty much covered the entire chapter. I obviously couldn't go into details and examples. There are so many quotes that we can refer to in the book, but I think that this will be, in a nutshell, enough and sufficient information to summarize the chapter.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sertkaya, for this beautiful presentation about Chapter 6, Prophet Muhammad as an educator. Now, a question came through our social media. Can you present to Muslim educators in today's world from our Prophet's perspective with some suggestions as to how we educate, looking at the perspective of our Prophet?
Well, I think to provide so many different examples, we would need another session to talk about that. But I think Prophet ﷺ's model, a few of them we already talked about it. One of the most important one was, I think, he himself practiced, and he was a loving prophet. He did not enforce people to do something. He didn't use a power. I think the book quotes somewhere, how he achieved this, and he makes a very good point. His domination, he says in the book, in the chapter, was not physical or military. Rather, he conquered the subjugated them by becoming the beloved of their hearts, the teacher of their minds, the trainer of their souls, and the ruler of their spirits. So I think that aspect is important. He was able to address them in a way that they love him, and he did not use force, but he himself was practicing. They were looking at him, and they were being fascinated with the way that he represented his message. That's one thing. I think the practice, what we call tamthil in Arabic, practicing what you preach, is important. Gradualism, I think, is another aspect of his education philosophy. He did not really, although it is very short period of time, we emphasize that, but he did not really, out of a sudden ask people to do something. He prepared them mentally. He addressed their, mental capacities, their hearts, and prepared them when the time came to say, this is the religious legislation. You have to do this. People were already ready to accept that. We don't follow this, and I think 3 points, like in very short, as a very short answer. One is practicing what you preach. Secondly, you applying gradualism, tadrijiyya, not jumping to the conclusion, saying, starting from the back, going to the, explanation. Explain that, gradually take people to that level is prophetic way. Thirdly, is addressing their all faculties. Islam is a very logical, very reasonable religion. There is nothing that you cannot explain logically. So Prophet ﷺ was using all these faculties, addressing all these faculties. So people, they were, astaghfirullah, they are not dumb people. They were not, blind imitators. His followers recorded in Western history sources, as when they talk about, let's say, Abu Hanifa or Ibn Atawullah al-Iskandarani. So this kind of people, or Khalid ibn Walid, they say, these are great minds of humanity. So they are following him. Why? Because it is logical, because it addresses all their faculties. It actually convinces them. So I think, if in a nutshell, if you practice at least these three things, but this is subject to time, subject to place. So in different levels, you can't use the same methodology for a kid. Same methodology cannot be applied for an adult. So there are different, ways to approach people, I think. But in a nutshell, he provided a very amazing philosophy and methodology that requires a very extensive discussion, I think.
Thank you. And our last question goes, literal understanding in education is too much at the forefront in Muslim societies. Would you like to comment on this?
That is true to some extent, but we cannot negate that literal education is also important. Memorization has a place, but I think more so than that, we need a method that people can adopt. Not because when you memorize something, you don't understand, you don't value, you don't acknowledge what you learn. You just just simply repeat it. So I think if that is in a face value, although it is important, but in a deeper sense, we need to kind of appreciate the knowledge and learn how to apply it and how to further advance the knowledge, or simply information into a knowledge that transforms, that changes our life, or that contributes to the society, that brings something new, or cause some invention, or some investigation findings. So I think that's that is lacking in a sense. But Prophet ﷺ, the last part in the book, which has a title called Further Remarks, talks about that. Prophet ﷺ did not limit capacities, flourished them. So he kind of introduced way and encouraged people to act, to be active, to not passive learners, not imitators, rather to understand, to work hard, to do it with itqan and ihsan, with excellence. I think that is beyond the literal education. It has more deep understanding and deep connotations.
Well, thank you very much for this, Dr. Suleyman Sertkaya, on Chapter 6, the Prophet Muhammad as an Educator of the Salam Islamic Center. See you with another series. Looking forward to that. Have a nice evening. Thank you.